Dear students, hope you are all safe and healthy. My name is Mudassar Abbas and I am lecturer at Institute of Business Studies, Kohat University of Science and Technology. My area of specialization is human resource management. Today we are going to study about decision making process. This is a sixth chapter of the book of Principles of Management with the course code of BS 121. Okay, before starting our lecture today, let's have an outline of this chapter. After reading this chapter, you should learn to outline the steps in decision making process. You should also be able to explain why decision making is so pervasive in organization. You should describe the rational decision makers, contrast the perfectly rational and bounded rational approaches to decision making. In addition to this, we will also be able to learn to explain the role of intuition in the decision making process, identify the two types of decision problems and the two types of decisions that are used to solve the problem. We should also learn to differentiate the decisions under certainty, risk and uncertainty. These are the three different types of conditions under which decisions are mostly taken. Describe the different decision making styles. So these are the certain main topics that we are going to cover in our lecture. Now first of all, let's discuss what is decision. There are several concepts or definitions available about decision. Generally speaking, it is a choice from two or more than two alternatives. Or we can also say that a conclusion or resolution reached after careful consideration. Or you can also define it as an action or process of deciding something or of resolving a question. All organization members make decisions in the organization on the daily basis. One way or other, employees and managers are involved in decision making process. Now, what is the decision making process? The decision making process is a process of making choices by identifying the decision, gathering information and assessing alternative resolutions. Using a step-by-step decision making process can help you to make more deliberate, thoughtful decisions by organizing relevant information and defining alternatives. Basically, a decision making process consists of 8 steps. Now, what are those 8 steps? We're gonna discuss in detail. Okay, so here is a complete set of steps that are taken in a decision making process. The first step is the identification of the problem. In this step, we try to dig out what the problem is through the symptoms available. In the second step, we establish the decision criteria. In the third step, we allocate weights to the decision criteria. In the fourth step, on the basis of decision criteria and allocation of weights, we generate alternatives. In the fifth step, we evaluate the alternatives. In the sixth step, we choose the best alternative available to us. In the seventh step, we implement the decision making. And in the last step, we try to evaluate the decision, that whether our decision has been properly implemented or not. This can be done by looking into the problem again, whether that problem still exists or not. If the problem still exists, we are going to repeat this cycle again. Okay, now we are going to discuss the decision making process in a bit more detail. As we discussed earlier, that the first step of decision making process is identification of the problem. First of all, let's discuss what is a problem. It is the discrepancy between existing and desired state of affairs. For example, there is a specific target that is to be achieved, and there is a target that actually companies achieve. If there is a huge difference between what a company wants to achieve and what a company is actually achieving, then we can say that there is a problem. The problem must be such that it exerts pressure to act. For example, the difference between what company actually is achieving and what company want to achieve is much more than what company can accept as a difference value. We can say the problem is not that much big. In order to act on a problem, the problem must be big enough that have a huge impact on a company. Manager is unlikely to characterize a situation as a problem unless he or she has the resources necessary to act. The second step of the decision making process is identification of the criteria. Now, decision criteria. What is relevant in decision making process? That means while taking a decision, what criteria should we keep in mind while taking a decision? The third step is the allocation of weights to criteria. We must weight the criteria to give them appropriate priority in decision making. This is also one of the important steps, that the criteria must be properly weighted, because not all the criteria have same importance. That's why we must weight the criteria, or we must give certain value to the criteria on the basis of the importance of that criteria. The next step in the decision making process is developing alternatives. In this step, we list the viable alternatives that could resolve the problem without evaluating them. In the fifth step, we analyze the alternatives. In this step, each alternative is evaluated against the criteria that we have set in the previous steps. The sixth step is the selection of the alternatives. It involves choosing the best alternative from those that are considered. Okay, the seventh step in this process is implementation of the alternatives. What do we mean by implementation? It is the process of conveying the decision to those affected by it and getting their commitment to it. A participation in the decision-making process inclines people to support the decision. If any kind of decision taken without the consent of the employees, the organization will face a resistance. So it is necessary that while taking a decision, the top management must take input from the people involved in it. A good decision may fail if it is not implemented properly. So we can say that implementation is an important step, because no matter how good a decision is, if it is not implemented properly, we can say that it will fail. The last step in the decision making process is evaluating decision effectiveness. In this step, we try to determine whether the problem is resolved or not. This can be done while referring back to the first step, in which we try to identify the problem through certain symptoms. So we can say that this is the entire process of 8 steps that is taken by the organization while making any kind of decision. Since the decision making process is an important management activity, let's once again go through this process. The first step is identification of problem. For example, the problem is my salespeople need new computer. So we can say that this is the problem identification, that we have identified that our salespeople are in need of computers. The second step is the identification of decision criteria. That means what are the criteria that should be kept in mind while taking any kind of decision. For example, here we have the criteria of price, weight, warranty, screen type, reliability and screen size. But keep in mind, here we are not listing it on the basis of its importance. The next step is the allocation of weights to the criteria. For example, here we give reliability value of 10. We give 8 to the screen size. Similarly, warranty has 5, weight 5, price 4, screen type 3. Now, keeping in mind the criteria and its weightage, we develop certain alternatives. We see that on the basis of this criteria, there are certain alternative options that are available to us. For example, we have Acer in the market that fulfills our criteria. We have Compaq, we have Gateway, we have HP, we have Micromedia, NEC, Sony, Toshiba. Now we will try to analyze these alternatives, that which one will suit us. So we can see that there are Acer, Compaq, Gateway, HP and so on, several computers that we should analyze. Then we will try to select the alternative from the list of alternatives given to us, and we will see which particular brand most suitable to our criteria. In implementation of the alternatives, we will try to select the best alternative. For example, Gateway is a brand which completely fulfills our requirement, so we will select Gateway as the particular computer that we will purchase for our salespeople. As we discussed earlier, that decision making is one of the important management activity. We see the management functions being supported by decision making, or we can say that decision is one of the important activity in all the management functions, such as planning, organizing, leading, controlling. Now, how decision is taken while planning? There are certain examples, like what are the organization's long-term objectives, what strategies will best achieve those objectives, what should the organization's short-term objectives be, how difficult should individual goals be. Similarly, in organizing, we see how many employees should I have to report directly, how much centralization should be there in the organization, how should jobs be designed, when should the organization implement a different structure. Similarly, in leading, we see how to handle employees who appear to be low in motivation. What is the most effective leadership style in a given situation? How will a specific change affect workers' productivity? When is the right time to stimulate conflict? Similarly, in controlling, we see what activities in the organization need to be controlled. How should these activities be controlled? When is the performance deviation significant? What type of management information system should the organization have? So we can see that in all management functions, one way or other, we are involved in decision making process. So now there is an associated concept to the decision making process, and it is rational decision making. What is rational decision making? The decisions that are consistent, value maximizing within specific constraints. That means that all that decisions that are consistent and that give us a maximum value or maximum benefit, we call them as rational decision making. Manager assumes to make rational decision making. That means that every manager take a decision that give them a maximum value, but within certain parameters or constraints. Constraints means limitations that a particular organization have. That can be in the form of financial constraint when you have a limited budget, or you can have a time constraint when you have limited time to take a decision. Now there are certain assumptions of rationality. We assume that while taking the decision, a decision maker would be objective and logical, carefully define a problem, have a clear and specific goal, select the alternative that maximizes the likelihood of achieving a goal, make a decision in the firm's best economic interest. Managerial decisions making seldomly meet all these tests, but we assume that while taking the decision, a manager should try to keep in mind these assumptions. Let's have a bit of discussion on rational decision making. Assume that it will have a single and well-defined goal that is to be achieved. Problem is clear and unambiguous. Final choice will maximize the payoff. That means that whatever we select, that will give us maximum output or value, or you can say benefit. There should be no time or cost constraint. All alternatives and consequences must be known to us. Preferences are clear And lastly, preferences are constant and stable. That means that the preferences should not keep on changing while taking a rational decision. Okay, there are certain associated concepts with the rational decision making. The first one is bounded rationality. This means behaving rationally within the parameter of simplified decision making process that is limited by individuals' ability to process information. That means we are not always in a position to take rational decision because the assumptions of rational decision making are not always being fulfilled. For example, the time and cost constraint. We are always in a position of having a limited time and limited budget. So we cannot say that our decision will be rational. Rather, we will say it is under bounded rationality. So we take a decision that satisfies, which means we accept the solution that are good enough. There is one other concept that is associated with decision making. We call it as escalation of commitment. It means increased commitment to the previous decision despite of the fact that it may have been wrong. Refusal to admit that the initial decision may have been flawed. Most of the time it so happens that the top management or the decision maker shows escalation of commitment to the previous decision. That is because he or she don't want to prove that previously whatever decision he or she has taken was wrong and now he has changed his mind. So in order to show that his or her previous decision was also right, the person show increased commitment to the previous decision. So we call that the manager is under the escalation of commitment influence.